It began in a hall charged with reverence and quiet power. The annual Veterans Leadership Forum was underway in Washington, D.C., a place where decorated soldiers, political leaders, and young influencers gathered to bridge the gap between generations of service. The spotlight this year, however, didn't fall on the familiar figures of military brass or senators. It fell unexpectedly on two people from entirely different worlds: Karoline Leavitt, the bold and often controversial White House press secretary, and Marcus Luttrell, former Navy SEAL and survivor of the infamous Operation Red Wings. Karoline had accepted the invitation to speak on the future of patriotism. The organizers, perhaps seeking drama or unity, also invited Luttrell to offer his perspective. Everyone knew Marcus Luttrell didn't mince words. He wasn't swayed by political polish or trending ideologies. And Karoline? She wasn't known for backing down. From the moment she walked on stage in her fitted navy blazer and American flag pin, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some applauded politely, others raised eyebrows. A few veterans folded their arms, skeptical of the young woman who hadn't worn the uniform but often spoke about sacrifice. Luttrell sat quietly in the front row, his expression unreadable. Karoline took her place behind the podium. "I didn't serve in the military," she began, her voice steady. "But I was raised to respect the flag, the people who defend it, and the values they die for." A few nods, a few eye rolls. "But patriotism," she continued, "isn't reserved for the battlefield. It's in classrooms, communities, and yes, even behind microphones like this." Somewhere in the front, Marcus shifted slightly in his seat. The air tightened. She spoke about restoring honor in discourse, confronting moral cowardice, and redefining duty for a generation raised on comfort rather than courage. Her words were sharp, deliberate, and meant to challenge. Then she paused, glanced down, and said, "But I also know I'm speaking in the presence of real heroes, people who don't just talk about sacrifice, they live it." She looked directly at Luttrell. "Mr. Marcus Luttrell is one of those people. And if he'll allow me, I want to hear what patriotism means to a man who's lived through the cost of defending it." There was a beat of silence. A camera clicked. Then Marcus stood, slowly, walked to the second microphone, and said only this: "You've got conviction, but I hope you're ready for what comes with it." The room bristled. No one quite knew if it was a challenge or an invitation. But everyone knew one thing: something real was about to unfold. Marcus Luttrell approached the second microphone with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had seen both war and the consequences of words. His frame was broad, his posture rigid, decades of discipline etched into every movement. The room had fallen so quiet you could hear someone setting down a water glass in the back. Karoline turned slightly to face him, her chin lifted, hands resting lightly on the podium. For all her fire in the media room, she didn't speak now. She knew better than to interrupt a man like this. "I've buried more brothers than I care to count," Marcus began, his Texas drawl slow and weathered. "Men who died believing they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. Not for headlines, not for trending tweets, for something real." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "I didn't come here today to argue politics, but I heard you talk about patriotism like it's something you can vote on." A few murmurs rumbled through the crowd. Karoline stayed composed, but her eyes narrowed. She knew what was coming. "You say patriotism lives in classrooms and microphones? And maybe it does," Marcus continued. "But don't pretend that kind of service matches standing in a mountain pass, praying you live to see sunrise." A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. Karoline didn't flinch. "I don't pretend, Mr. Luttrell," she said, finally stepping forward. Her voice was calm, but firm. "And I don't compare. But I do stand for a generation that's been told our love for this country doesn't matter unless it came with bloodshed. That's false." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "False? You think comfort creates courage?" "No," she said, her voice tightening. "I think comfort creates complacency. That's what I fight. I might not carry a rifle, but I carry a responsibility. And if you think I don't take that seriously, say it to my face." The air turned electric. One veteran shifted forward in his chair. A young cadet in the back held his breath. This was no longer a keynote, it was a test. Marcus gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, then replied, "Good. You've got fire. But fire alone burns everything down. Let's see if you've got something else. Direction." He stepped back. Karoline didn't respond. Not immediately. Instead, she turned back to the crowd and said, "Maybe this is the moment we stop assuming we're enemies. Maybe this is where the fight begins, but not against each other." And for the first time, the room offered both of them something rare. Silence filled with respect. Later that afternoon, the forum reconvened in a panel format. Veterans, politicians, and influencers now sat in a wide arc beneath the towering seal of the Department of Defense. Marcus Luttrell was seated near the center. Karoline Leavitt was 2 chairs away. Cameras had been invited in. The session was supposed to focus on policy, but the tension between the two had become the main event. A moderator from a major news network posed a general question to the panel. "What do you believe is the greatest threat to American unity today?" The microphone passed along, thoughtful responses about polarization, disinformation, and economic hardship. Then it reached Marcus. He didn't hesitate. "The greatest threat? Words without consequence." He glanced toward Karoline, just briefly. "We've built a culture where people with no skin in the game can say anything, twist sacrifice into sound bites." The implication wasn't subtle. Karoline's eyes sharpened, but her posture didn't waver. When the mic came to her, she leaned forward. "Mr. Luttrell, I respect your service, but I won't be shamed into silence because I haven't worn the uniform. Words have consequence. That's why I choose mine carefully. And when I defend America, I do it knowing that millions listen, including the children of those who died serving it." Gasps and quiet nods moved through the room. Marcus's jaw flexed. "But let me ask," Karoline said, turning toward him now, voice controlled but direct. "Do you believe the only way to earn a voice in America is through war?" Marcus replied coolly, "No. But I believe you should understand what you're defending before you speak so loud about it." "I do understand," Karoline shot back. "I understand that sacrifice isn't just found in combat. It's found in courage, and sometimes courage means standing in rooms like this, saying things people don't want to hear." A wave of murmurs. The moderator jumped in, trying to steer the conversation. But the crowd wasn't ready to move on. They were witnessing something more compelling than policy. A fundamental debate about the meaning of patriotism, service, and leadership in modern America. Marcus leaned in slightly, this time quieter. "Talk is easy, Karoline, especially when you've never seen a flag folded for a friend." Karoline paused. "I've handed one to a mother," she said quietly. "My cousin, Sergeant Tyler Hale, killed in Kandahar. I was 15 when I gave her that flag." The room froze. Marcus's face softened, barely, but it was there. He nodded slowly as if reassessing. Respect, real and earned, began to form between them. But they were far from agreement. The conflict was still burning, only now it had history behind it. The silence that followed Karoline's revelation could have swallowed the room. Even the moderator, usually so adept at moving conversation along, fumbled with his cue cards, unsure of where to go next. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were listening. Marcus adjusted in his seat, the lines around his eyes tightening. "I didn't know that," he said. It was the first time his voice lost its edge. But the fire wasn't gone. "Then you know how sacred that moment is. You know what it means to carry their legacy." Karoline nodded. "Yes, I do. And that's why I speak out. Not just for them, but for the kind of country they believed they were protecting." Marcus seemed caught between 2 instincts, respect and resistance. Then Karoline reached into the folder on the table in front of her. "I brought something," she said, voice steadier now. "Not as a politician, as a cousin." She unfolded a weathered piece of paper. "This is a letter Tyler wrote me before his last deployment. He asked me to read it someday, if I ever had a platform. Marcus's expression shifted. Karoline looked down and read, "Karoline, if I don't make it back, don't let the country forget why we fight. It's not just about safety. It's about who we are. Don't let fear win. Speak up, even if your voice shakes, even if they tell you you're too young or too loud. Do it anyway. That's your uniform." She folded the letter gently, not for effect, but because it meant something. The room was still. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "That's a damn powerful letter." "It's the reason I'm here," Karoline replied. "And the reason I won't back down when people assume I don't understand sacrifice." Marcus nodded once. "You've got your reasons. I get that. But speaking truth also means being ready for what comes next. Not everyone's going to believe you. Some will come for your throat." Karoline's gaze didn't flinch. "Let them." The moment marked a shift, not in agreement, but in recognition. The clash had moved from accusation to understanding. But both still had more to say, and neither had yielded ground. It was no longer about proving one's past. It was about defining America's future. Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His tone sharpened again. "So you read a letter. That's powerful, sure. But letters don't win wars, and words alone don't heal a broken nation. What are you doing, not saying, that honors him?" Karoline didn't flinch. "I'm fighting for accountability, for border security that doesn't sacrifice humanity, for veterans who come home and get left behind, for families like mine who know the pain of a folded flag." Marcus's brow furrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. "You say the right things, but the game in DC isn't about truth. It's about survival. You think your passion's enough to outlast the machine?" "I don't just think it, I know it," she said, locking eyes with him. "Because people are tired, Marcus. Tired of the lies. Tired of the division. They want someone who's not afraid to get bruised in the fight." He didn't answer right away. He studied her. "You remind me of someone," he finally muttered. "Young, mouthy. Sure, she had the world figured out. My sister. She joined the Navy straight out of high school. Told me I was too cynical." Karoline tilted her head. "Did she change your mind?" "She died in a helicopter crash 2 years later," he said bluntly. "But yeah, she did." The crowd hushed again. No music swelled, no cue lights flashed. Just the raw electricity of two people standing in the rubble of shared grief. Karoline's voice lowered. "I'm sorry, Marcus. That kind of loss, it changes you. It should. But not everyone lets it." He looked her straight in the eye. "That's why I came here tonight. Not to attack you. To see if you actually believe what you say. Or if you're just another polished mouthpiece." Karoline stood slowly, the weight of the moment pressing on her. "I'm not a mouthpiece. And I'm definitely not polished. I'm flawed. But I'm real." Marcus stood too. The tension shifted. Less like a debate, more like a battlefield truce. But as they faced one another, it was clear. Something deeper had just begun. The real confrontation was no longer between two people. It was between two versions of what America could become. The room remained silent as Karoline and Marcus stood face to face. The weight of personal loss, national service, and ideological divergence hung in the air like storm clouds ready to crack. But instead of thunder, there was honesty. Marcus leaned in slightly, not with aggression, but scrutiny. "You've got fire, I'll give you that. But fire without aim burns everything down. So tell me, what's your target, Karoline?" Her voice didn't waver. "I want to rebuild trust between citizens and leaders, between military families and the promises made to them, between America and its own conscience." "That's a tall order," Marcus said, almost amused. "You want to bridge every divide?" "No," Karoline answered. "But I want to start with one." She stepped forward, the flags behind her casting long shadows over the stage floor. "I watched my brother's casket roll off a plane. I shook hands with politicians who didn't remember his name a week later. I'm not here to play games. I'm here because this country owes people like your sister and my brother more than speeches." Marcus's eyes flickered. For the first time, the warrior's armor cracked. Just a little. "So what makes you different?" he asked. "I stayed angry," she said, "but I learned how to use it." He studied her face. "Anger's a tool, but it's also a trap. I've seen it chew up soldiers and spit them out. Can you keep your rage pointed in the right direction?" Karoline paused, then nodded slowly. "Only if I remember who I'm fighting for, not just what I'm fighting against." A faint murmur ran through the audience. It wasn't applause. It was recognition. The kind of quiet you hear when something real lands with people, when truth sneaks past ideology and hits the heart. Marcus took a breath. "You speak well, but Washington isn't built for people like you. It chews them up. You sure you're ready to get dirty?" "I've been dirty," she said. "I've buried a brother. I've stood alone in rooms full of doubters. And I've learned that silence is a choice I won't make again." Marcus didn't reply at first. Then, with a slow nod, he offered something unexpected: a seat. "Then sit," he said. "Let's talk not as opponents, but as people who know what it means to lose." Karoline sat beside him, not in triumph, but in resolve. The crowd didn't cheer. They listened. Because for the first time, this wasn't a debate. It was something deeper, and the nation was still holding its breath. As the moderator returned to the stage, unsure whether to move the conversation forward or simply let it breathe, the cameras zoomed in on a sight no one had expected: Karoline Leavitt and Marcus Luttrell seated side by side. It wasn't a gesture of surrender. It was wariness meeting respect. The moderator cleared his throat. "I think we've entered uncharted territory here. Karoline, Marcus, would either of you like to continue?" Karoline turned to Marcus, her expression composed but firm. "You asked if I'm ready to get dirty. Let me show you what I've already dug through." She reached into a file at her side and pulled out letters. Dozens of them. "These are from military spouses, parents, kids, forgotten by the VA, abandoned by the system. I didn't ask for these. They found me, because someone had to listen." Marcus raised his eyebrows. He took one of the letters gently, unfolded it, and read silently. When he looked up again, his voice was low. "How many of these are there?" "Hundreds, just in the last year." The moderator leaned forward. "So what are you proposing?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "A full audit of the VA's case backlog. Mandatory follow-ups for any case left unresolved beyond 6 months. A hotline staffed by real people, not robots. And quarterly testimony, public under oath on the progress." Marcus exhaled through his nose. "That's ambitious." "No," she said. "It's basic human decency." He looked at her again, this time not as a provocateur, but as a possible ally. "You know this'll cost you, right? The moment you go after the bureaucrats, the swamp turns on you." "I've been underestimated since I walked into my first press briefing," Karoline replied. "But if I lose because I fought for the people who wore the uniform, so be it. At least I'll lose with my spine intact." There was a pause. Then, with the weight of a man who had buried too many friends, Marcus said quietly, "You've got more guts than most of the suits I've met in D.C." She offered a dry smile. "That's probably why they hate me." The crowd shifted. Some whispered, some nodded. What had started as a confrontation was evolving into an alliance forged not by agreement, but by truth. Two lives, one shaped by war, one by politics, converging on a shared purpose: accountability. Then Marcus turned to the camera for the first time. "If you're watching this, and you've ever felt like no one gave a damn after your service, maybe now's the time to believe someone finally does." The room fell quiet again, and Karoline, now holding another letter, looked up and said, "This one's from a mother whose son took his life waiting for care. His name was Daniel, and this moment, is for him." A long silence followed, not because no one had anything to say, but because they knew something had just shifted in the conversation around sacrifice, leadership, and the cost of silence. The silence in the room was thick, almost sacred. Not the tense, confrontational quiet from earlier, but a heavy stillness born of truth. The kind that wraps itself around the crowd and demands they listen, not with their ears, but with their hearts. Marcus leaned forward, voice steady but raw. "What you said about Daniel, that's not politics. That's real. And I've known too many Daniels." Karoline nodded. "So have I. That's why I refuse to play the Washington game with them. I didn't come here to be liked. I came here to break the silence." The moderator glanced at his notes, visibly unsure how to steer a conversation that had shifted so dramatically. "Karoline, some would say you've built a reputation on confrontation. But tonight, this feels different. More personal." She turned to him, her tone sharpened with resolve. "Because it is personal. Every soldier waiting months for care, every family left without answers. It should feel personal to all of us. This isn't about party lines. It's about promises made and broken." Marcus added, "I've sat in rooms where people in suits nodded politely but didn't move a muscle when it came to action. What she's doing right now, this is the first time I've seen fire that isn't just for show." Karoline glanced at him. "I appreciate that, but let's be clear. This fire comes from rage. Not at our country, but at those who let it rot from the inside while waving flags for applause." Gasps echoed softly through the audience, not because of what she said, but because of how true it rang. A veteran from the crowd suddenly stood. His voice cracked as he spoke. "My brother served in Afghanistan, came home with nothing but a scarred mind and broken knees, took his own life 2 years ago. No one listened. Until now." Karoline stood, visibly moved, and nodded in his direction. "I hear you, and I won't stop speaking for you." Marcus stood beside her. "Neither will I." The crowd erupted in a rare emotional applause, not the performative kind for cameras, but a heartfelt outpouring of something deeper. Recognition, solidarity, maybe even hope. The moderator cleared his throat. "So what now?" Karoline turned to the camera. "Now, we hold them accountable. We turn these lights on every corner of silence. And we don't stop until justice isn't something you have to beg for. It's something you receive." She paused, looking at Marcus. "You with me?" He nodded, his voice a low rumble. To the end. As the segment faded to black, the screen held on a moment that no one watching would forget. Karoline Leavitt and Marcus Luttrell standing side by side, not as adversaries, but as allies. Not just in rhetoric, but in purpose. A promise had been made on live television, and the nation was watching to see if this time it would be kept. The auditorium's atmosphere had shifted. Where earlier there had been skepticism, now there was a strange tension in the air, curiosity mixed with respect. Marcus Luttrell had asked for proof, and Karoline Leavitt wasn't going to let that challenge hang unanswered. She reached into the folder she'd placed on the lectern earlier, her hands steady, and pulled out a photo. Old, grainy, but powerful. It showed her late grandfather, a Marine who'd served in Vietnam, standing beside his squad, younger and proud, in the dirt of a war zone. "This," she said quietly, holding the image high for the crowd to see, "is the man who raised my father, who taught me what sacrifice looks like. You said I needed to know what it means to fight for something. I do. It's been my family's legacy long before I held a microphone or stood on a stage." Luttrell's face softened. Not in agreement. Not yet. But the dismissive edge was gone. He studied the photo as the room stilled. Then Karoline continued. "Just because someone hasn't worn the uniform doesn't mean they're disconnected from duty," she said. "Some of us fight with words, some with laws, and some, like you, with unimaginable courage on the battlefield. But we're all trying to protect the same thing, the soul of this country." The silence in the room was almost reverent. A veteran in the front row stood slowly, then nodded. "Let her finish," he said, not to anyone in particular, but it landed like a command. Karoline caught Luttrell's gaze again. "I know I'm young. I know I'm not what everyone expects when they hear the word leader. But leadership isn't about who yells the loudest or who's fought the hardest battle. It's about knowing the cost of freedom and choosing to stand up for it anyway." At that, Marcus Luttrell, this towering figure of quiet strength, stepped forward. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his own pocket and held up something small, metallic, and unmistakably heavy with meaning. A challenge coin, reserved for those he deemed worthy of his personal respect. He didn't hand it over. Not yet. But he placed it on the edge of the lectern and looked her squarely in the eye. "We're not done," he said, voice lower now, almost reluctant. "But you earned that." Karoline didn't touch it. She just gave a small nod, grateful, but steady. The conversation wasn't over, but the tone had changed. She hadn't just defended herself. She had earned the first sign of acknowledgement from a man who'd seen the worst of war. And for the first time that evening, the crowd didn't just clap, they rose. A standing ovation began, slow but unstoppable. The standing ovation continued for a long, charged moment. But Karoline Leavitt didn't bask in it. She knew this was bigger than applause. This was about bridging a divide most believed was unbridgeable, between generations, between experience and new energy, between the battlefield and the political arena. Marcus Luttrell stood beside the lectern now, the challenge coin gleaming in front of him. The applause faded, and with it, the room's raw electricity shifted into something more intimate, like the air before a final verdict. He looked at Karoline, then out to the crowd, his voice firm but quieter than before. "Words are easy, but conviction? That's rare," he said. "I didn't expect to be challenged tonight. I came thinking I was going to teach a lesson, but sometimes the lesson hits you in the face wearing a green jacket and carrying her grandfather's photo." The audience chuckled softly, breaking the tension. Karoline stepped forward again, not to gloat, but to close the distance. "I never wanted to win a fight with you," she said, voice sincere. "I wanted to earn a conversation, and maybe, just maybe, prove that there are still people in my generation who understand what your generation sacrificed for." Luttrell studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he picked up the challenge coin again, this time, turning it over in his fingers. "This doesn't come easy," he said, holding it between them. "I've seen too many people speak pretty words and do nothing." Then he handed it to her. Gasps echoed, not loud, but audible. The symbolic weight of that coin, especially coming from Luttrell, was enormous. Karoline didn't just accept it. She closed her fingers around it with reverence. "This doesn't mean I agree with everything you say," he added with a slight grin. "But it means you've got the fire. And fire, if it's aimed right, can do a hell of a lot of good." Karoline nodded, her voice caught for a second. Then she raised the coin high for the crowd to see, not as a trophy, but as a promise. "Then let's build something better, with truth, respect, and yes, a little fire." The crowd erupted again, not with division, but unity. Marcus turned to the audience, nodding once. "Looks like I'm not the only one learning something new tonight." And with that, the cameras cut to black. But the moment, two generations standing side by side, was already being clipped, posted, and shared across the internet. Within hours, headlines read, "She faced a war hero and won his respect." But Karoline didn't need headlines. She had the coin in her pocket and a message in her heart. America didn't need perfect leaders. It needed honest ones. And tonight, one had just stepped forward. Tonight wasn't just about politics. It wasn't about proving who's tougher, louder, or more experienced. It was about finding common ground between courage earned on the battlefield and courage found in standing up for what you believe in. Karoline didn't just speak, she listened. She didn't challenge a war hero out of defiance, but out of deep respect. And Marcus Luttrell, a man forged in fire, saw something rare in return: authenticity. This wasn't a clash, it was a turning point. Because when generations stop shouting past each other and start hearing the heart behind the words, that's when real change begins. And tonight, a new voice earned something far more valuable than applause. She earned respect. This is Surprising Stories. If this moment moved you, share it. Because every story like this brings us one step closer to the kind of country we can all believe in. We'll see you next time, with another story you didn't see coming.